one of the posters that I saw in the hallway at Bard was a sign for this novel writing program at 826. And I saw it and was like, I want to do that. That sounds awesome. It was towards the end of my sophomore year in high school, and I had no idea about what I was going to write a book about, but it sounded really cool, and I knew I wanted to do it. And so I went home and I told my parents, I saw this poster and I want to do it, but like, what am I going to write about? And my dad said, you have all of these short stories, which I really think are outlines for longer books. Why don't you take a look at one of them, see if you have a favorite, and pull it out and start working on it. So I think the moral of that was it's okay to start something without knowing how it's going to finish. Because I wrote, the application required the first 15 pages, which I wrote in about 48 hours. And sent in, and I had no idea what was going to happen after that. And I sent it in and then was extraordinarily nervous, like, what if I do get in, then what am I going to do? I have to write an entire book about it. And I got a message from Joan saying that I was accepted into the program, and I was jumping up and down, and nobody was home, and actually ran across the street to Miriam, who is here, and said, Miriam, I got into this program, and I was like hyperventilating, and I couldn't understand what I was saying, but could definitely tell that I was excited. And the program was structured as an 8-week program. We had to write 15 pages a week. We met twice every week, so it was 7 to 8 pages. The first draft of the book, you can see very clearly that this was the structure, because every chapter is 7 to 8 pages. And it was actually originally written all by hand, because that's how I write best. And if you go through it, there are some things in it that you actually still see, like paragraphs that are in the final version, and there's a lot that's been vastly changed since then. But I really tried to use deadlines to my advantage with the program, because I had to get it done, because I was in this group of 5 young writers and 1 adult who we were working with, Dan Ehrenhalf, who, we were all counting on each other to work together and to go through this together. And so I just sort of took it as like, write it out. And that was something that I had gotten from Bard as well. When you're really not sure what to say, you just sit down and put pen to paper and keep going. And I was lucky enough to be in a group of 4 students who I was really, really comfortable working with. And we all were able to this is going to sound terrible, but we just criticized each other. We never got involved in, like, say 2 nice things and 1 mean thing. It was like, no, just tell me what's wrong with it. And the chapters where you got things like, this dialogue is a tiny bit off, you're like, wow, this must have been great. Like, we're just talking about tiny bit off dialogue. Versus, like, other chapters where it was like, what were you even trying to say in this paragraph? And I actually have a huge binder that was all of my printed out copies that my teammates had written their notes on, and some of the notes were like very specific, like, this doesn't sound like this character, it sounds like somebody else, are you sure that you want this person saying this? And some of them were, one of the people in my group drew how angry he was at one of the characters when she did something that he didn't like. And so I have that little doodle right there next to the page. And when we finished those books, we submitted them. We had that 2 months, and then we had a few months afterwards to edit them. And I think we were supposed to switch adults that we were working with at that point. And Dan suggested that, if I wanted to switch, that was fine with him. And if I wanted to continue working with him, he really liked the project and he would like to keep working with me. And I said, I would love to. And so we spent a few months editing the book together, and that was lots of late nights, because at that point it was junior year, and there were also SATs and homework and stuff. And my mom would poke her head in when the light was still on around 3:30 and say, do you want a sandwich or something? And I would say yes. And got it in by the deadline. There were 9 of us who finished our books on time, and those 9 are in the 9 novels by younger Americans, which I highly recommend. I don't know how many copies are still out there, but I have copies which I will lend to people if you're interested. They're really awesome. The books are really cool. And I think that from working on that, I really got over my fear of sharing drafts, which is something that can be really hard. But because I worked with, these 4 awesome students, and with Dan, who had, could be very but you just don't have it right here, but never in a way that made me feel like a failure, just in like, no, you kind of need to rework this, it just doesn't work. I kind of got over that fear of sharing drafts, and actually the group of 5 of us continued to share early drafts of short stories for months after that, and I still get short stories from another girl who was in the program who actually wasn't in my group, which are fantastic, and I'm kind of, Sarah Myra Rosenberg, if you ever see her name, jump on it, because it's awesome. And so Dan and I had stayed in touch after the 9 novels came out. I worked for him at a dating website that he started up. I did some copy editing for him. We talked about every 6 months. And he called me when I was in college, and it was not unusual. It was about our 6-month check-in. And he said, so I got this new job at a small publishing house called Source Books. And I'm really happy with it. My big thing is I'm building their YA line. And I said, wow, that's great. That's what you really wanted to be doing. I'm so excited for you. And he said, yeah, so I think I'd like to publish your book. And I said, what? And he said, so if you just, I just need your permission to pitch it, because, we don't bring in a book that not everybody loves, so I need your okay, and then we'll start moving ahead with it. And I said, well, that's sure. And he called me back a few weeks later and said, everybody loves it, and we want to make you an offer and move forward with it. And for me, it was almost as exciting that I got to work with Dan on this project again as anything else, because having put it down for 4 years and come back to it, I really felt like there were changes to be made. Whereas when I had finished editing it, when it went into the 9 novels, I was like, it's perfect. Of course, I'm sure when I look at it again 5 years from now, I'll think to myself, well, that reads like something that I wrote when I was 21. But right now, it read like something I wrote when I was 16. And a lot of it wasn't exactly starting from scratch, but it was a lot of pretty heavy rewriting that needed to be done. And I used the original as a guideline of getting from point A to point B. In each chapter, but a lot of the interim stuff changed, and a bunch of the characters really changed and became different people. And it was great for me because it was like coming back to old friends who I had spent a ton of time with for a long time, and then I hadn't seen in years, and it turned out that they were still basically the same people, but had grown up a little bit, had gotten a little bit more depth than a 16-year-old really sees in things. And I just got to hang out with them again. So I went through rewriting the book with Dan, and then when Dan left Source Books, went through and actually got a fresh eye, which was great with Leah, so that I had somebody who hadn't been working on it for 6 years, which had been great, but it was also good to have a fresh eye. And once we finished it, it came out in the advanced reader copies with, as you can see, a pretty different cover than the final one, which we all loved. There was actually a cover contest, and people voted, and this was a mix of the 2 covers that came in first and second. And it was, I think, right before the final version went to press that somebody said, the cover is great, but it doesn't really exemplify the story. The story isn't especially creepy, and the cover is very, very creepy. And so we switched to the final edition, which I think is a little more girly, like myself. And which I think is just, as you can look across the line, I think lesson number 5, and I'm not sure that I've specified lessons 1, 2, 3, or 4, but lesson number 5 would be that the people who care about you really want you to succeed. And I had a lot of people who worked on this with me from the beginning, from saying, why don't you pick a short story, through to, I'm not sure that this cover is actually what the book is about. And it made it exactly what I would have wanted and what I was picturing, and here it is.